What's cracking everyone? My name is Eric, and today I'm trying out a new type of video. So today we're gonna make a cash system, as you often see being done in, for example, role-playing games, where you have some kind of currency which you can use. It's essential in a lot of games. So having one is pretty cool to have. So I'll just have in my scripting place, and I'll clear out all the scripts, or mainly just my one script from last time. As you can see, this is what we played around with. Oh, and it's completely clear. But so yeah, as I said, normally I try to do like general kinds of tutorials, but which is great and all, but often people need just something specific, which is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to change up my videos a bit. Video quality is still scuffed, especially with all these noise issues, but yeah, I apologize for that. Anyway, let's get started. So let's just quickly take a look at this. So I wanted to split it into 3 videos and then another fourth bug fixing video, but that's way too much. So this video is going to be a bit longer, but instead I'm going to chapter it and split it into 3 parts. The first part is going to create the actual system. The second part is going to show you how to interact with cache and how to actually change a player's cache. And then the third part is going to show you how to actually save and load in cache so that it saves from PlayStations as you see being done in those big games that you know. For example, We're Citizens, which is an example of a classic role-playing game which needs cache. So go to Server Script Service and create a script. And by the way, there are some things I'll talk about which I haven't covered because once again, that's this new type of video that I'm trying where it's more specific things. So yeah, you should be able to understand most of it if you followed everything so far. But don't worry if there's anything you don't understand because I've not covered everything I'll be showing you. So you can call this anything really. You can call it. I'm gonna call it currency script because later on we're going to have another data script. For this video, actually, I'm just going to make both the data saving and the currency creating in one script, I think, because it's so simple. But for bigger games, you want to do two separate scripts, one which creates the actual cache and one which saves and loads. Anyway, yeah, sorry, let's get actually started. So first part, let's actually create the cache system. The cache system is actually pretty simple. It works in that it adds an int value like that, which is an object which has a property which can be changed just like you wanted to under a player. So each player has this int value which is called cache or something, and then you can just change this value, and that's everything cache is. It's just an object each player has. So yeah, that's the first thing we need to do. We need to register when the player joins, and then we need to give them the object. And also, I'll actually show you how to make it show up. So I can show it right now, but normally you have these leaderboards and it shows cache. I'll also show you how to do that. So let's get started. So we want to detect when a player joins. Now we talked about paths, but we didn't talk about events. Basically, events are signals that get sent when a certain thing happens. In this case, we want to look for the player added event. This is an event because it fires when a player joins. And actually, I did that way too quick. Sorry. Let me just type that again. So first of all, we want to go to game.players. You can see it pops up here. And then you want to say .player added. You can see it pops up here. Now, this is an event. So this is a signal that fires whenever a player joins, but you need to connect it to something. You need to essentially tie it to a function. You need to run a function when this signal fires. So what you do is you type connect with a capital C, like that. You can see it adds in a blank pair of parentheses. And now in these brackets, you want to say function, and then another pair of blank parentheses, as if you're writing a new function, and then enter, like that. So it says game.players.player added, connect, function, parentheses, and then end. And in these parentheses up here, you want to say player, because this is a variable for the player which has joined. Now, this is already a bit complicated, but as long as you understand in general what we're doing, this is fine. So yeah, if you want, you can just pause and copy what I do. That's completely fine. It's just important that you understand what we're doing here. That would be great. So now we need to add one thing actually before we add in the number value. We need to add in a folder, which is just a container, because sure, we can add in the value under the player, but it's going to be cleaner if we have like a folder under the player. Because once again, you might need other values such as XP or levels and stuff like that, other currencies other than cash. So I'm going to make that folder. I'm going to say local, and I'm going to say folder. This is a variable for our folder. Local folder, and then I'm going to say equals to, and I'm going to say instance, like this, dot new. So this is another thing that we haven't talked about. essentially instance set new. This basically this is what we call a constructor, but don't worry about what that means. This is essentially this is just something that creates a new object for us. So when we type instance set new, we create a new object. So you say instance set new, and then in these parentheses and in quote marks, you want to say what type of object you want to put in. I'm looking for a folder, so I say folder. And just like that, it's created a new folder for us. However, there is a problem. We haven't parented the folder to anything, and we haven't given it a name. And that's important. So we say folder, and then we set it's .parent. You can see the .parent transparent, no, sorry, property actually pops up here, and we set that to the player. And then the same thing with name. We say folder, and then .name. And then you can set it to whatever. This can be data, or this can be currencies, or whatever. I'm going to set it to leader stats in all lowercase. I'm going to show you what that does in a minute. So let's just take a moment to recap what we've done so far, though. We have an event, which is called player added. So this fires whenever a player joins our game. Now, when this player joins, we create a new folder for that one player. And we then give that folder to the player and name it leader stats. So we've now gotten an empty folder which is called leader stats. And actually, just to show you that it's working, I'll just go ahead and playtest it. Just to kind of take a break so I don't go way too fast. I apologize if I'm doing that. Once again, feel free to ask any questions or anything like that. But yeah. So you can see if I go under players and I say Eric the developer, you can see that I've actually got a folder called leader stats. We don't have anything in it, but we do have the folder because, well, we haven't added anything in it. So that's going to be the next part. So now we've created our container. We've created an empty container for all of our currencies. So now we just want to add in the cash value itself. So we say local, and then this is going to be the cash value. So you can call it cash value or cash or whatever. I'm going to call it cash, but once again, this is a variable name. You can set it to whatever. So I'm going to say local cash, and then we do the exact same thing as before. We say instance.new. However, this time we don't need a folder. As I said, we need a number value. So I say int value. Now, there is also another object called number value. The difference, so you may be asking, what is the difference between int value and number value? Well, in technical terms, int is basically short for integer, which is a whole number. So the difference is that int values can only store whole numbers. So if you want to store a value like 1.7, you'd need a number value for that. However, because int values can only store whole numbers, they can store a lot larger numbers than number values. I don't remember the exact limit, but yeah. In my case, I'm going to use int value. Chances are you'll also be using int value if you're dealing with whole numbers. Sorry, but if it's possible for the player to have a decimal number of whatever value it is that they want, just make that a number value. It doesn't really matter whether it's an int value or a number value. So then I'm gonna do the exact same thing as before. Sorry. So now we need to give the cache a parent, and then this time, instead of it being the player, we want to put it in the container that we made, the leader stats folder. So we don't say player, but we say folder, just like that. Because remember, this is referencing our variable here, so this just gets added under this folder right here. So now we have a cache value under our folder. However, right now it's just called value. So not the value. To give it a name, we just say cache.name. And then this is the official name of your currency. So this can be cash, or this can be money, or whatever. I'm gonna call it cash to keep it simple. But yeah. So let's just take a moment to look. Again, we've made a folder, and we've made a number object, or sorry, int object, or int value, which we put under our folder, which is going to be cache. So let's just play test to check that everything is working. So if we spawn in here, you'll notice, well, if we look in the Explorer, we see our leader sets folder, and under that leader sets folder, we have a value called cache, and we have a value. It's set to 0, but that can be changed, which is what we'll talk about in part 2. However, as you may have noticed, if I go back to the leaderboard here, you can actually say that that it has this thing right here, cache. It displays like that. So how does it do that? The thing is that Roblox is actually really smart. It makes it super easy to add in leaderboard values like that. To make a value show up in a leaderboard, you simply need to add it under a folder called leader sets, like this. So what this means essentially is that if you want a folder to show up on the leaderboard, you call it leader sets. But if you don't want it to, you call it anything else. Just to give you an example, if I rename this to data, so it's not called leader sets anymore, then you'll see that the leaderboard disappears. So if you want your cache value to show up on the leaderboard and be seen for everyone, then name your folder leader sets. You remember it must be named leader set for it to show up. Otherwise, if you don't want it to show up, you can just rename it something else like data or leader sets with a capital L. But yeah, if you want this to show up in the leaderboard, it needs to be called leader stats, all lowercase, and then Roblox will deal with that automatically. Now, that was the first part. So now we've created a basic cache system. Right now it doesn't save and and we've not changed it or anything, but it's still there. So that is the basics of our first cache system. This is, if you want to, you can go ahead and pause. This is literally the entire code. It's just 9 lines. You can make it even shorter if you want it to look like a mess. But yeah, super simple, or simple at least. That depends from person to person. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense so far. Anyway, moving on to part 2. So now we want to actually interact with the cache. We want to change the player's cache. We want to give the player cache and want to change it. So to actually give the player cache, we need to talk about the client server model. So I've actually not got this open, which I apologize for. So I'll just search it up here: Roblox client server model. Because this is quickly important to understand. Because I've seen a lot of bugs with cache systems originate from issues with the client server model. So essentially, the client server model basically shows how clients and servers interact with each other. Now, the client is essentially a player. So you can see that we have a server, and for each server, we can have several players. You probably already understand this. So I'll leave a link to this article in case you want to know more. But basically, we have one server which ensures that all players are getting the correct experience, and we have a bunch of players. Now, the thing is that both players and, let's use technical terms for now. Both clients and servers can run code. When if you want to see whether it's a client or a server running some code, you can just see what type of script it is. If it's a regular script like this means it's a server code, and you can see. So this means that our currency script right here is actually server-sided, meaning that the server runs code. To make a client run some code, you set a local script like that. And we haven't really talked about this, but yeah, we'll talk about more about that later. But yeah, anyway, the important thing to understand here is that we need the cache change to happen on the server. This is very, very important. What this means is that essentially, when we add a cache to a player, it needs to be the server doing it, because everyone needs to see that forget that. The important thing here is that it's important that the server adds the cache to the player. You can add it yourself, so you shouldn't be adding cache to a player from a local script, because then you have some issues with client and server communication. We'll talk about that later. So let's actually take a look at an example where we want to add cache. I'm going to make a button here. It's going to be super quick. I'm just going to drag it here. I normally don't do this, but it's just I just want to batch it together quickly. So I'm going to make it a tick scale. I'm going to say add 500 cache. So under this button, I want to add in a local script. So I'm going to say script.parent. And this is another thing we talked about in the past video. We talked about how we can go down, but we also talked about how we can go up. So we can start at the game, but we can also start at the script. So script the parent, that is the text button right here. And then we want to look for another event. So I'm going to say that the mouse button clicked. It should pop up for you. Sorry, I know I'm going way too fast. I should probably slow a little down. But yeah, what we're doing now is we're checking for when the player clicks the button. So when the player clicks the button, we want to do the exact same thing as before. We want to say connect, like that, and we want to say function. However, this time we're going to leave the parentheses blank, and we're just going to say answer like that. This is a little confusing so far, but yeah, I've made a button here which adds our cache. You probably don't want to do the same. The thing is, the idea is that in your game you have different places where you'll need to add cache or where you need to remove cache and stuff like that. This is just an example because there's so many cases where you could be adding cache, like when a player sells something, when a player completes a mission or something like that, and it will take way too long to set up. So I'm just putting a button here just to show you as a quick example. So anyway, the way to actually add cache is pretty simple. You reference the player, you simply write the player, and then you access the object via path, and then you set that to a new value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say game.players.localPlayer. No, because this is a local script, we actually have access to the local player variable. The local player is basically the player that this local script is running for. Because remember, every single player has a copy of the script. So I'm going to say game.players.localPlayer, and then I'm going to say .leaderstats, because remember this is the leaders folder, and I'm going to say .cache, and then I'm going to reference the .value property. And then we can set it to something. The problem is that we can't just set it to something. If I set it to 500, it would always be 500. Yeah, so it will also be 500. It wouldn't really change. So the first time I click, it will go to 500, but then after that, it will always set it to 500. So the way we actually change something is we want to set the new value to be the old value plus 500. So I'm going to take the exact same path as here, and I'm going to copy and paste it in, and I'm going to say plus 500. So let's say we have 200 cache at the moment. It reads this and it says this is 200 cache at the moment, but we want to change that. So it changes that to the current cache, which is 200, plus 500, which is 700. So it reads this, adds 500, which gets us 700, and then it writes that to the value. Well, that was quite complicated. I apologize for that, but yeah. And actually, a quick shortcut. If you want to be even smarter, you can there's an operator called plus equals, and basically what plus equal does is it shortens this equation right here. So what we've done right now is we've written a equals a plus b. In this case, a is the the player's cache, and b is the value that we want to add. However, with the plus equals operator, we can just say a plus equals b. If you don't know what this means, then don't worry about it. You can just do this. Basically, this is a plus equals a plus equals b is basically a shorter way of writing a equals a plus b. So you can just say plus equals 500 like that. So game the player is the local player. The least that's the cache the value plus equals 500. Once again, I'm sorry for going so fast. This is meant to be a general and also a quick tutorial. As long as you understand generally what we're doing, then it's fine. But yeah, I'll leave troubleshooting and common bugs found at the end of the video, which you can check out if you want. And also feel free to ask any questions or suggestions or feedback or anything like that in the comments as always. So what we've done now is we've checked for an event. So this piece of code runs when we press this text button right here, this add 500 cache button. And then when that runs, we simply add 500 cache to the local player. There is an issue, however, with this, but let's take a look at that a bit later. So I'm just going to run this, and you can see that if we look at our leaderboard, you can see that when I add 500 cash, it adds cash up in the leaderboard and also in the folder view. So you can see that our cash system is working. And I can keep adding cash like this, and it will just go up and up and up. And you can change this to being whatever, 500, 200, whatever. There is an issue, however, because as I talked about, this is a local script. So we want, however, we can't really add cash on a local script. Having adding cache in a local script works, but it will lead to bugs later on. So what we need to do is we need to have it on a server script. The problem is that we can't really detect when a player clicks a button from a server. So all we need to do is we need to communicate between the server and client. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to check for the client. The client is going to check when the player presses the button, and then it's going to send a signal to the server. And then when that server gets the signal, it will add cache to the player. So to do this, we actually set up what's called a remote event. Sorry, I'm going to go to replicated storage, and I'm going to say, and I'm going to add in an object which is called remote event. Once again, this is getting kind of complicated. More about it is covered on the client-server communication article, but yeah, essentially this is a kind of signal that both the player and server can see. So what we need to do is we can just rename this to add cache. So this is a signal which add cache like that. So this is a signal which we send to the server when we want to add cache. So now what we do instead of adding cache is that we just send this signal to the server. So what I'm going to do is instead of making a path to the player's cache, I'm going to say game.replicated storage and then dot the name of your remote event, which is going to be add cache in my case. And now it's going to be get a little complicated again, so bear with me here. But now you want to say colon and then fire server. So what we've done now is we've written, and it should add in these parentheses right here. So now we've set fire server, which basically means we fired this signal to the server. So now when the player clicks a button, it sends a signal to the server saying, hey, we want to add cache. So now the server just needs to respond to this signal. So we are gonna make a part on this server script which actually reads that remote event or signal and adds cache. So I'm going to say game.replicated storage add cache, and then instead of saying fire server, we're going to say dots on server events. This is another event just like the player added event, which means that we can once again connect it to a function. And this time we can type player again because this is going to be the player that sends the signal. So if you want to go ahead and take a moment to copy this, it says game.replicated storage.add cache. So it's this signal right here, and then a dot on server event. So this function will run when we get the signal. So in other words, this function right here will run when the button is pressed. The button is pressed, the player fires the signal to the server reads the signal and runs this function. And now we can do the exact same thing as before. We can just start adding cache. So I'm going to say player, and then I'm going to say .leaderstats, which is going to be our leaderstats folder right here. And then I'm going to say .cache, which is our cache object. And then I'm going to say .value. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing as before, where I'm going to say plus equals 500. So let's just take a moment to backtrack, stop, and take a look and see what we've actually done. So because it does the exact same thing as before with some differences. Before, it registered when the player presses a button, and then it adds the cache right here to the player. However, what we've done now instead is we register when the player touches a button. We then send a signal to the server. The server gets the signal, as you can see right here, and then when the server gets the signal, it adds 500 cache to the player. Now you may be asking, what is the point of this? You may be asking, what is the point of this? Like, it seems needlessly complicated with all these signals. It's not needed. But keep in mind that now the cache is being added on the server, which is important. Now, It's not that I can't explain why. It's just that it'll take too much time. So if you actually look in the comments down below, I've pinned a comment, a detailed comment explaining why it is that we actually need to change the values on the server and not the client. But yeah, so if you can, so I don't bore everyone else. Anyway, if you take a look now, you can see that we've got our add 500 cash button. You can see that it does the exact same thing as before. We can keep adding cash, but it does it on the server, which is great. That is how you add cash. If you want to remove cash, it's pretty simple. You just write minus equals, or rather, you can just say minus 500 right here. So that would subtract 500 cash. Anyway, that was the second part on how we actually change cash. So now on to the third part, which is probably the most complicated part. So brace yourselves. So now we need to actually save and load in the now I actually need to save and load in the cash in our currency. So to do this, we actually need to use an API service. An API service is basically an advanced service which can do a lot more advanced things for us that we normally can't do. In this case, we need to use what's known as the data store service. Now, before you can actually use these API services, you need to go to game settings. So I'm going to go to game settings, and then you can see under security, you can see that we've got these four things which we can enable. We can enable HTTP request, API services, third-party sales, and third-party teleports. Now, all of these are irrelevant except for API services. So you want to enable Studio access to API services. And this is where I see a lot of people going wrong. I always see people also allowing HTTP requests. You don't need HTTP requests. I mean, it doesn't do anything. So feel free, it doesn't do anything good nor bad. So feel free to enable it, but it doesn't do anything. You need API services, but not HTTP requests. Well, that's difficult to say, sorry. But yeah, I always ask people like, have you enabled API services? Yeah, and they are like, yeah, but not HTTP requests. They need to enable that. No, you don't need HTTP requests. I constantly see YouTubers doing this as well as experienced scripters. You don't need it. And those who add it, they actually often correct themselves. But yeah, API services needed, HTTP requests not needed. I don't know why I'm putting so much emphasis on this. I just see a lot of people allowing HTTP requests for a data store, which you don't need. But yeah. So now we've saved that and we've enabled API services. And you may actually need to publish your game to Roblox before you can actually use API services. I think I've done that. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I haven't. I don't know. It needs to be published, and yeah. Anyway, now we can actually start. Now we can actually start using our data store service. So first of all, we need to actually get our data store service. So I'm gonna make a variable for our data store service. I'm gonna say local, and then I'm gonna say data store service like that, and then I'm gonna get the service. So to get a service, we say game, and then get service like this with colon and a pair of parentheses, and then I'm gonna say get service. And then in quotation marks, I want to write the name of the service that we want to do. So I'm going to say data store service like that. You can see it pops up. So now we've gotten the data store service. Now we need to create an actual data store. This is basically the database where we store all the players' information. So to create a data store, you write once again the name of the data store or a variable for it, which in my case is just going to be Oracle data store. And then you're going to say the variable of your data store service, which is data store service here. And then you're going to say get data store like this. And then you want to name your data store something like that. I'm going to call it cache database, but you can call it whatever. So now we've gotten the data store and the service tab we need. So now we can actually start loading in stuff. So we want to do two things. When the player joins, we want to load in cache, and when the player leaves, we want to save cache. So let's just actually take a moment to do both of those things. So I'm going to add in another event like this one, except instead of it being player added, it's player removing. So when the player leaves. And it's the exact same thing as before. So you connect that to a function with a player variable. So what you want to actually do is you want to use the set async function, which is basically a function to save to a data store. That's a bit sorry, that was needlessly complicated, but yeah. Anyway, what you want to do is you want to say local success, comma, error message, and then equals pcall. Now the pcall is basically an error handler. This basically handles errors and troubleshoots our data store for us. So I'm going to say equals pcall function right there, just like that. So you can see it now says local success, comma, error message equals pcall function. And this function is where we are going to save our data or our cache. So I'm gonna say so now we just need to actually save it, which is pretty simple. So to actually save something, you just say data store, or the variable for your data store, which is data store in my case. Then you want to say colon set async like that. Now when you actually set async, you need to provide it two things. First of all, you need to provide a key for it, and second of all, you need to to give it a value. So basically, let's take a moment to talk about what keys and values are. So the data store has a bunch of keys, and under each key, it has a value. So the keys are basically a way to index the values. If you look in a book, it has page numbers and it has stuff written on those pages. The value is what we want to save. That's what is actually important to us. That's the player's cache. So so that is going to be the value. So imagine you have a book. So the value in our case is the cache. That's what we want to actually use. That's what's written on a page. However, you don't actually know where that page is located. You know it's there. You know the value is there, but you don't know where. So we use what is known as a key, as I just talked about. The key is like the page number on the book, which in this case can be something like page 283. So let's say that I know something is written at page 283. I just don't know where that it's at 283. So I look up, I looked at, I see page 283. I go to page 283, and then I find the value that I'm searching for. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, for every value we have, we also need a kind of key, which basically allows us to search for the value. So we need to write two things. We need to write the key and the value. The first thing we need to write is the key. And this needs to be player dependent, meaning that a part of the key actually needs to be something like the player's name or the player's use ID so that it's unique for each player. So I'm going to say player. Oh, wait, sorry, wrong spot. I'm going to say player dot use ID. Now this you could use this as a key, so that's just going to be a long string of like 11 numbers or something like that. But I'm going to concatenate it with another string. So I'm going to merge it with a string which says dash, and then it's going to say cache. So these two dots is basically concatenation, which basically merges two strings. So what I've essentially done is I've merged two strings. The first one is a string, or no, sorry, a use ID, which can be something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the second one is a text which says cache. So now I want to merge these two so that it becomes one long key, which is called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cache. So that's going to be an example of a key. So that is the first part. That is the key that we've written. And now for the second part, we want to write what value we actually want to save. I'm going to do player.useid.cache. This is my key. And then I want to write a comma, and then I'm going to type in the value that I want to save. In this case, it's just going to be my player's cache. So I write player.leavestats.cache.value. Now we've actually saved the player's cache. We've given it a key, player.useid.cache, and then we've saved the cache value. Now we need to actually load it in. So now we've saved it. So now whenever the player leaves, it saves the cache. The problem is that it doesn't really load it in. We also need to load it in and apply that to our current cache. So that's what we're going to do. Now, it's going to be pretty similar, but with some extra steps added. First of all, I'm going to create a blank variable, which is going to be called cache data. So this is basically the variable which is going to be used for whatever the data store loads in. So I'm going to do the exact same thing as before, where I'm going to say local success error message, and then I'm going to say pcall function like that. So I've made a blank variable, and then I've made this pcall right here, local success, comma, error message equals pcall, parentheses, function, blank parentheses. And then in here, this is the error handling part. So this part is error handled by the pcall essentially. So now I can actually load the cache data in. So what I can do is I'm going to say cache data, our variable here is going to be equal to, and then I'm going to do data store get async this time. So instead of set async, it's get async. Now with the get async, it's pretty similar to the set async, except you don't need to provide a value, you only need to provide the key, basically the key for which value you want to get. So I'm going to do, it's important that the key you use for the get async is the exact same as the one you use to save, because if you use a different key when loading than from saving, well, it's not going to work properly. So for example, let's say I have two spots. I have spot A, I have spot A and I have spot B. So when I save my cache, I save it to spot A. However, when I load my cache, I load from a spot called spot B. So you can see, because I haven't saved anything to spot B, it just loads into your cache. I don't know if that explained it, but yeah. So your key needs to be the same both when saving and loading. So to do this, you can actually just copy that, player.useid.that-cache, like that. And as you can see, we've now used the same key for both loading and saving. And the important part is that you actually save it to a variable. So you can see I get this async, and then I also save it to my cache data variable. So now I have a cache data variable, which is whatever amount of cache the player has loaded in with. So as a final thing, we're going to do an if statement, which checks if the player actually loaded in something. Because if it's a player's first time playing, they won't load in anything. So to do this, I'm going to say if, and then I'm going to say cache data, and then I'm going to say then. So just like that. So this checks if the cache data thing is real. So if we loaded in cache data, if we had some cache saved, it will now load it in, and now we just need to apply it. We've already got our cache value from before, so we can actually just say cache that value, and then that is going to be equal to cache data, just like that. However, if we haven't got, yeah, you can just write it like that. So now it will only apply the cache data amounts to our cache if we've actually loaded in something, meaning that we've played before. However, if you want to, you can actually add in an else statement. So this is if it's a player's first time playing. So now that, so then you can give them some starting cache. You can say something like cache dot value, let's say equals 200. So now every new player will start with 200 cache, but otherwise they will just load in the cache they previously had. So, wow, that was a lot to cover. Let's just take a moment to sum up what we've done here. So, the local script, we haven't done anything about that. You can take a moment to copy that. Pause now if you want to copy it. We've got it. Moving on, and then we've got this monster right here. So, 34 lines of data saving code. If you want to take a moment to pause it now and copy it. But yeah, as you can see, we let's just take a moment quickly to actually talk about what we've done here. So we get our data store stuff, our data store and our data store service. Then we have a big block of code here, which happens when the player joins. And a few things happen here. First of all, it creates the cache value for the player. It then loads in cache. And then if it loads in any cache, meaning that the player has played before and has saved cache before, it then gives that loaded cache to the player. So if I've saved 700 cache from my last session, it will then load in 700 cache. And if it detects that I do have 700 cache, it will give me 700 cache. Otherwise, if I haven't played before, if this is my first time playing, it will just set my cache value to 200, meaning that, my starting cache is 200. And then we have an event when the player leaves, the player removing event, which is pretty simple. This is just a pcall with a set async function. So this just saves our data. That's everything it does. And then as the last part, this is a remote event or a signal. So this is just a signal it registers, which adds cache to a player when it gets a signal. And of course, this signal is triggered by us pressing the button. Whoa, that was a lot to cover, but that was everything for now. So let's just play test it. This may go wrong depending on a few things. Let's hope this goes right. Otherwise, let's learn from my fault. that's here. So as you can see, because we have played before, but this is the first time we're playing with the data store in place, so it registers us as a new player. So we start with 200 cash. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna press add 500 cash twice, meaning that we are now up at 1200 cash. So I'm just gonna walk around a bit, and then I'm gonna stop. So now we've stopped it, and what we're hoping is that it saved our cash here, or 1200 cash. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play again, and hopefully it should load in our 1200 cash. If done, we can start talking about a few troubleshooting steps. But yeah, we're just gonna wait for it to load in, and as you can see, I now spawn with 1200 cash, even though I stopped it and played it again. And you can see, and I can keep going like this. So if I add 500 again, stop and play again, I'll not have 1700. So now your cash saves from say session to session, just like that with this script right here. That is everything you need. So as a bonus part, if you're done, if you're happy with what you've got, if everything is working out, you can just pause the video. However, this is going to be a troubleshooting part. So this is going to be a few common bugs that I see. So if you've got any bugs or any issues with your cache system, then check this part because I'm going to run through that. So let's go through a couple of bugs which you may have encountered in case it didn't work for you. The data saving part, that is. So first of all, check for any errors. You can check that in the output console. It will often give you a line number or something like that. This is what we call a syntax error. So this can be stuff like misspelling something. For example, if I wrote this with a small c, it will give me a syntax error, and will also give me a line number and everything like that. So check in the error console for that if you've got any syntax errors like that. Hopefully it should, otherwise if it's clean, you can start going through the other steps, which are errors with the data set itself. First of all, check that you've access to API services. So make sure that your game is published. Remember, publishing a game doesn't mean that it's public, it just means that it can be found on the Roblox page. In fact, if I go to permissions, you can see that per standard it's set to private, meaning that even though it's published, only you can play it. So yeah, if you've got it published, go to game settings, security, and make sure that studio access to API services is on. Everything else is irrelevant, but API services needs to be on, and this doesn't have anything to do with HTTP requests or anything like that. As another part, make sure that the actual cache change happens on the server. So I added my cache here on the server. Remember to use remote events if you want to send a signal to the server. You need to add the cache on the server. This is so important. Once again, you can read my pinned comment for that explanation on why. But yeah, the data save won't register it. It won't save it if it's done on the client. You can't add cache from a local script. That must be done from the server. That is very important. Make sure that all your cache changes happen on the server. Anyway, I've stressed that enough. Another thing you can look for is making sure that your keys are the same. Your key for get async must be the exact same as your key right here for the set async. Once again, to make sure that this is the exact thing, you could just copy your key here and insert it here under get async. So yeah, make sure that your key is exactly the same. But yeah, those are just some common troubleshooting steps that I've encountered. Those cover probably about 95 to 99% of all the errors I see people do, or that I do myself, or well, at least did. I've worked enough with data saves now. I've learned my way around it. But yeah, anyway, that's it for this video. That was quite lengthy. I apologize for that, but hopefully that gave you a functional cache system and gave you everything you needed to have at least some basic cache system. In a future video, we might actually talk about how to actually use this in an advanced way, such as how to actually display your cache or something like that. But yeah, those are three parts on how to create it, and a fourth extra troubleshooting part, which should hopefully cover your concerns. If you still have a bug, feel free to comment that. I'll try my best to help you. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for watching, and goodbye, everyone.